The air in Dr. Sharma's office was a carefully curated calm, a symphony of muted earth tones, soft lighting, and the faint, clean scent of eucalyptus. It was a room designed to soothe, to encourage openness, to dismantle the fortresses people built around their pain, but for Ethan, it felt like a courtroom. He sat perfectly still, his back straight, his hands resting on his knees. Between his fingers, he held the corner of a simple manila envelope, its contents a dense, heavy secret. Across from him, his wife Chloe was performing her sorrow. Her shoulders were slumped, a delicate hand pressed to her temple as if warding off a migraine brought on by his very presence. She had the art of appearing fragile down to a science. Dr. Sharma, a woman whose placid expression revealed nothing, leaned forward slightly. "Chloe," she said, her voice a gentle invitation. "You were saying that you feel trapped. Can you tell me more about that?" Chloe took a deep, shuddering breath, the kind an actress takes before a monologue. "It's the control," she said, her voice trembling with practiced vulnerability. "Specifically the financial control. He questions everything. Every purchase, every decision. It's like I'm a child, and he's my warden, doling out an allowance. He uses money to manage me, to keep me small." She looked at Ethan then, her eyes full of a glistening, theatrical accusation. He met her gaze without expression. He thought she was a brilliant performer. She had convinced herself of this narrative so completely that the lie had become her truth. He, the warden. He, the one keeping her small. The irony was a physical weight in his chest. Ethan knew the truth. He knew it, with the cold, hard certainty of numbers on a spreadsheet, of balances in accounts she'd never seen, of debts paid in the dead of night while she slept peacefully in their sprawling, custom-built home. He wasn't a warden. He was a dam, holding back a flood of her own creation, and the papers in the envelope resting against his leg were the schematics of that dam, detailing every stress point, every crack he'd quietly sealed, every torrent he'd single-handedly diverted. Chloe thought he was financially controlling. She didn't know he was the only thing standing between her and financial oblivion. Within 1 hour, in this sterile, peaceful room, that dam was finally going to break. "Before we witness the flood, I want to ask you something. Have you ever felt completely misunderstood by the people who are supposed to know you best? It's a lonely place to be. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and if this story resonates with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world. Now, let's get back to Ethan and the truth he's about to unleash. 2 months earlier, the humiliation had been served as the main course. The setting was the Ashworth family home, a monument to old money and new debt. Chloe's parents, Richard and Eleanor, presided over their Sunday dinner table like monarchs holding court. The dining room was opulent, all dark wood and crystal, the air thick with the scent of roasted lamb and condescension. Ethan sat beside Chloe, a silent island in a sea of familial chatter that always seemed to flow around him, never to him. "Ooh, I saw you pulling up, Ethan," Richard had boomed, dabbing his lips with a linen napkin. "Still driving that sensible little sedan, are we? Nothing wrong with practicality, I suppose, though I do find that a man's car often reflects his ambition." He winked at Chloe's brother Leo, who sat opposite, smirking into his wineglass. Leo drove a leased Maserati, a fact he mentioned at every opportunity. The lease payments, Ethan knew, were 3 months in arrears. He'd received the notification himself, as Leo had, in a moment of panic, listed Ethan as a financial guarantor without his permission. "It gets me where I need to go, Richard," Ethan replied, his voice even. He didn't bother to mention that the sensible little sedan was paid for in cash, or that it was one of 3 vehicles he owned, the other 2 being stored at his private office downtown, an office this family didn't know existed. Eleanor, Chloe's mother, chimed in with a sigh that was somehow both delicate and dismissive. "Oh, let him be, Richard. Not everyone is built for the corner office." "Chloe, darling," she said, turning her attention to her daughter and pointedly ignoring Ethan. "I saw the most divine little clutch at Dior. It would go perfectly with the dress you're wearing to the gallery opening. You must let your father get it for you." I already have it, Mother, Chloe said, preening slightly. She gestured to the handbag sitting on a nearby credenza, a flash of quilted leather and gold hardware that cost more than the average person's monthly rent. Ethan was hesitant, but he came around. Ethan said nothing. He remembered the conversation clearly. It wasn't hesitation. It was a quiet suggestion that perhaps a fourth $5,000 handbag in as many months was excessive, especially when they were supposedly saving for a new roof. Chloe had flown into a rage, accusing him of trying to stifle her, of being jealous of her family's lifestyle. He had relented, as he always did. He transferred the money, paid the bill, and swallowed his concerns. It was easier than the fight. It was always easier. Later, as they were clearing the plates, Leo cornered him in the kitchen. Listen, Ethan, old boy, he started, clapping a hand on Ethan's shoulder with false camaraderie. About that little venture I told you about, the artisanal crypto farm. The seed funding is almost complete. I just need a final $50K to get us over the line. I know things are tight for you, but this is a guaranteed 10-bagger. I'd be doing you a favor, letting you in on the ground floor. Ethan looked at Leo, at his smug, entitled face. He knew everything about the venture. He'd had his own firm's analyst run a background check. It was a scam, a poorly conceived grift designed to part fools from their money. This was the third can't-miss idea Leo had pitched him in a year. Ethan had quietly covered the losses from the first two, a bespoke dog-walking app and a line of vegan leather jackets, to the tune of over $100,000, all to spare Chloe the embarrassment of her brother's failures. I'll have to think about it, Leo, Ethan said, his voice a mask of calm consideration. Don't think too long, Leo warned, his tone shifting from friendly to threatening. An opportunity like this doesn't wait for a man who drives a Honda. Ethan simply nodded. He walked back to the dining room and saw Chloe laughing with her mother, utterly oblivious. She hadn't defended him once. She had basked in her family's casual cruelty, her silence a tacit agreement with their assessment of him. He was the sensible, unambitious, Honda-driving husband, the provider of her lifestyle, the silent financier of her family's follies, but, in their eyes, he would always be less. He watched her, and for the first time, the exhaustion of maintaining the facade felt heavier than the peace it was supposed to buy. He knew then that something had to change. The dam was beginning to show its first hairline cracks. The conversation, when it happened, was meant to be a gentle course correction, not a declaration of war. A week after the disastrous Sunday dinner, Ethan found Chloe in their sun-drenched sitting room, scrolling through a travel blog on her tablet. The afternoon light illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air and caught the fire of the new diamond earrings she wore. A little pick-me-up, she had called them. Ethan held a single sheet of paper, a neatly organized spreadsheet he'd spent an hour preparing. He had framed it carefully, using "we" and "our goals" to soften the blow. Chloe, can we talk for a minute? He asked, his voice calm and measured. She looked up, annoyed at the interruption. I'm busy, Ethan. I'm planning our trip to Santorini. The villas with the private infinity pools are booking up fast. That's actually what I wanted to talk about, he said, taking a seat in the armchair opposite her. He held out the paper. I was running our monthly numbers, and I think we might need to scale back a little bit if we want to hit our savings goals for the year. Chloe didn't even glance at the spreadsheet. Her eyes narrowed. Scale back? What does that mean? It just means being a little more mindful, Ethan said, choosing his words with surgical precision. Maybe we postpone the Santorini trip until the fall, or we choose a less extravagant package, and perhaps we could look at the credit card statements together each month just to see where the money is going. It's not about restriction, it's about awareness. The reaction was instantaneous and volcanic. Chloe shot to her feet, her face a mask of outrage. Awareness? You want to look at my statements? You want to put me on a budget? My father, she spat, her voice rising, never, not once, made my mother account for a single penny she spent. He gave her the freedom and the respect she deserved. This, she said, gesturing wildly at the spreadsheet in his hand, is not respect. This is control. This is you trying to turn me into some kind scrimping, coupon-clipping housewife. That's not what this is, Ethan said, his own voice remaining unnervingly level. The contrast only seemed to fuel her fury. This is about partnership. We have shared goals. The new roof, the landscaping project. You care more about a roof than my happiness, Cotton, she cried. This is what you do, Ethan. You diminish me. You make me feel small and frivolous for wanting the kind of life I was raised to have. You knew who I was when you married me. He did. He knew she was the daughter of Richard and Eleanor Ashworth, raised in a gilded cage of casual extravagance. He had hoped, naively, that her love for him would temper her materialism. Instead, his quiet, steady competence had simply become a resource for her to exploit, a foundation upon which she and her family could build ever larger castles of debt. Internally, Ethan cataloged the numbers she refused to see. The $30,000 he had paid to settle her father's misunderstanding with a business associate, the $18,000 for Leo's last failed startup, the average of $15,000 a month that flowed out through her personal credit cards, covering lunches, designer clothes, spa days, and 1,000 other luxuries she considered necessities. His own spending was a fraction of that. His suits were off the rack, his lunches were packed from home. His car was a model of efficiency. Every dollar he saved, every bonus he earned from the firm she knew nothing about, went into the gaping maw of her family's lifestyle. I'm not trying to diminish you, Chloe, he said, his voice soft but firm. I'm trying to protect us. Protect me? She scoffed, laughing a bitter, humorless laugh. You need to protect yourself, Ethan, from your own pathetic middle-class anxieties. I'm going to Santorini, and I'm booking the best villa they have. Put that in your spreadsheet. She stormed out of the room, leaving him sitting in the sun-drenched silence. He looked down at the paper in his hand, the neat columns and logical figures. It was a map of their reality, a reality she refused to inhabit. He folded it carefully and tucked it into the inside pocket of his jacket. It would be the first document he would place into the manila envelope. The collection had begun. He knew, with a sinking feeling that was part dread and part relief, that he would need it someday. That day was coming far sooner than he thought. Back in the sterile calm of Dr. Sharma's office, the air crackled with unspoken tension. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Dr. Sharma, ever the patient moderator, turned her gaze to Ethan. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes held a question, an invitation. Ethan, she said, her voice gentle yet firm. We've heard Chloe's feelings about this. It's important that we understand your perspective as well. What do you think when you hear Chloe say she feels controlled? Ethan opened his mouth to speak, to finally begin the slow, deliberate process of revealing the truth. But before he could utter a single word, Chloe leaned forward, cutting him off. It was clear she had prepared for this moment, rehearsed her lines, assembled her case. My perspective is that he's a hypocrite, she declared, her voice ringing with self-righteous anger. He talks about our goals and the budget, but it's a one-way street. He wants to control my spending, but he won't even discuss his own. I don't know how much he makes. I don't know where our money is invested. He keeps it all locked away, a big secret. How is that partnership? It's the ultimate control. She settled back in her chair, a triumphant look on her face. It was a good point, Ethan had to admit. A clever, calculated strike. From the outside, it painted him as a secretive, manipulative husband. Dr. Sharma made a note on her pad. Is that true, Ethan? Do you keep your financial information from Chloe? Yes, Ethan said simply. There was no point in denying it. I do? Chloe let out a small, vindicated gasp. You see? He admits it. What reason could he possibly have unless he's hiding something? Or unless he just enjoys holding all the power? She was on a roll now, presenting her list of grievances to the court. Last month, I wanted to help my brother, Leo. He had this incredible opportunity, a tech startup, and he just needed a small investment to get it off the ground, a show of faith. When I asked Ethan, he just said, no. No discussion, no explanation, just a flat number. How is that not control? Ethan's hand, of its own accord, tightened on the edge of the manila envelope. He remembered that conversation. He remembered the 2 days he'd spent having his firm's forensic accountant investigate Leo's opportunity, uncovering the shell corporations and the trail of debt that led back to a loan shark in another state. He'd said no, not to control Chloe, but to keep the mob from breaking his brother-in-law's legs. And the vacations, Chloe continued, her voice rising with passion. I wanted to go to Paris for our anniversary. A simple romantic trip. He said it was too extravagant. Too extravagant. But then he turns around and spends money on, I don't even know what. A new watch? Hobbies I know nothing about? He has his secret stashes, his secret life, while I have to beg for a trip to Paris. The watch on his wrist was a 10-year-old Seiko his father had given him. The extravagant cost he'd cited for the Paris trip was because he knew she wouldn't settle for a 3-star hotel and economy flights. Her version of a simple romantic trip would have involved first-class airfare, a suite at the George V, and a shopping spree that would have cost more than his car. The money he'd refused her for that trip had instead gone to pay the property tax bill on her parents' house, a bill they had conveniently forgotten to mention until the final notice arrived in the mail, forwarded to his address. Ethan remained silent through her tirade. He let her build her case, brick by painstaking brick. Each accusation was a twisting of the truth, a funhouse mirror reflection of his attempts to protect her. He saw Dr. Sharma looking at him, her professional neutrality wavering ever so slightly. He could see the doubt creeping into her eyes. He looked like the man Chloe was describing. Quiet, secretive, uncommunicative. His silence was being mistaken for guilt. He let the silence hang in the air for a full minute after Chloe finished, her chest heaving with the effort of her performance. He didn't look at her. He looked at Dr. Sharma. Is she finished? He asked, his voice devoid of emotion. The question, so calm and direct, seemed to startle them both. Yes, I think Chloe has expressed her feelings for now, the therapist replied. Ethan nodded slowly. His gaze dropped to the envelope in his hands. He ran a thumb along its crisp edge. The quiet before the storm. He knew that when he finally spoke, when he finally opened that envelope, this room, his marriage, and Chloe's entire world would be irrevocably changed. The weight of that knowledge was immense, but it was a weight he was finally ready to set down. The storm was coming. The invitation had been more of a royal summons. Eleanor and Richard Ashworth's 40th wedding anniversary. The event was to be held at their sprawling country club adjacent home, a house that groaned under the weight of its own mortgage. A fact known only to Ethan, who had arranged the last 3 refinances through a discreet contact at his bank. Attendance was not optional. Chloe had made that clear. It's for my parents, Ethan. You will be there, you will be pleasant, and for one night you will not make us look poor. The irony of that statement was so thick he could have choked on it. The evening arrived, draped in a suffocating blanket of humidity and fake smiles. Ethan stood on the manicured lawn, a glass of lukewarm champagne in his hand, a ghost at the feast. He wore a simple, well-tailored navy suit. It was understated, elegant, and had cost more than Leo's entire wardrobe. But to the Ashworths, it was invisible. It wasn't covered in designer logos. Richard cornered him by the bar, a portly predator in a pink polo shirt. "Ethan," he bellowed, slapping him on the back hard enough to make him spill his drink. "Good of you to make it. Listen, I was talking to a fellow at the club, a real titan of industry, and we were discussing the importance of aggressive growth strategies. You're in, what is it again? Project management? You need to be thinking bigger, my boy. You can't just be a cog in the machine. You have to own the machine. Let me know when you're ready to play with the big boys. I can make a few calls." Ethan nodded, a faint, polite smile on his face. "Thank you for the advice, Richard. I'll keep that in mind." He didn't mention that his project management firm, Archer Design and Development, was currently finalizing a bid on a municipal contract worth $250 million. He didn't mention that the titan of industry Richard idolized had been trying to get a meeting with him for 6 months. Later, as he was trying to find a quiet corner, Leo intercepted him, holding 2 glasses of whiskey. "Here," he said, thrusting one into Ethan's hand. "Loosen up. You look like you're at a funeral." Leo looked Ethan's suit up and down with a critical eye. "You know, my tailor could do wonders for you. A man in your position should project success, even if it's not quite there yet. Fake it till you make it, right? I'm comfortable. Thanks," Ethan said, taking a small sip of the whiskey. It was cheap and harsh. The final cut of the evening came from Eleanor. She glided over to where he stood with Chloe near the lavish dessert table. She kissed Chloe on both cheeks, completely ignoring Ethan. Darling, you look exhausted, she purred, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. This must all be so trying for you. I never understood why you insisted on marrying down. Love is a wonderful thing, I'm sure, but it doesn't pay for a decent caterer. Chloe flinched but said nothing. She didn't defend him. She didn't walk away. She just stood there, a silent accomplice to her mother's cruelty. In that moment, watching his wife absorb her mother's poison without a word of protest, Ethan felt something inside him shift. It wasn't anger. It was a profound and sudden clarity. The love he had been trying to protect, the peace he had been trying to buy with his silence and his money, was an illusion. It didn't exist. He was funding a performance, and he was the only one who didn't know it was all an act. He looked past Eleanor's perfectly coiffed head, through the French doors, and out at the sprawling garden. He saw the new stone patio, the Japanese maples, the elaborate water feature. He knew the exact cost of every single element, because he had paid the landscape architect's invoices himself 3 months prior, after Richard's credit card was declined. He finished his whiskey in one swallow, the cheap liquor burning a trail down his throat. He set the empty glass down on the table. With a soft click, he caught Chloe's eye and gave her a small, unreadable smile. He was done. This was the last time, the very last time, they would ever speak to him this way. The quiet was over. The storm had arrived. The following week, they were back in Dr. Sharma's office. The air, once just tense, was now heavy, primed for a lightning strike. Chloe had just finished another litany of complaints. This one centered on the humiliation of the anniversary party, where Ethan had been antisocial and moody, reflecting poorly on her. Dr. Sharma turned to him, her expression patient but insistent. Ethan, she said, her voice cutting through the lingering echo of Chloe's accusations. We've spent 2 sessions hearing about Chloe's pain. I cannot help you as a couple if I only hear from one of you. We need to hear your side. We need to hear your voice. Ethan looked at Chloe. At her face flushed with righteous indignation, he looked at Dr. Sharma, a professional trying to navigate a minefield with a faulty map. Then his gaze dropped to the manila envelope that had been his constant companion, resting now on the small table between their chairs. He placed his hand on it, the paper cool and smooth beneath his palm. He took a slow, deep breath, not for calm, but to oxygenate his resolve. He lifted his head and met Dr. Sharma's eyes. His voice, when it came, was shockingly quiet, yet it commanded the entire room. It was the voice of a man who had nothing left to lose. Chloe is right, he began, the words falling like stones into a silent pool. Chloe's eyes widened in triumph. She shot a victorious look at the therapist. She's right that I have been controlling the finances. She's right that I have been secretive. She's right that I have been holding all the power. He paused, letting the admission hang in the air. Chloe's smirk was radiant. But she's wrong about why. Ethan continued, his voice hardening almost imperceptibly. I haven't been controlling our finances to diminish her. I've been controlling them to prevent our complete and total ruin, brought on by her and her family's pathological inability to live within their means. The smirk vanished from Chloe's face, replaced by a flicker of confusion and anger. How dare you, she stammered. Ethan ignored her. With a deliberate, almost ceremonial slowness, he untied the string on the envelope and lifted the flap. The quiet bomb was armed. He reached inside and pulled out the first document. It was a single-page summary, printed in a neat, clear font. He didn't hand it to Chloe. He slid it across the polished surface of the table to Dr. Sharma. This is a summary of the credit card debt I have paid off on Chloe's behalf over the past 24 months, he said, his voice a clinical monotone. The total, as you can see at the bottom, is $382,415.17. All of it paid from a business account at Archer Design and Development, an account Chloe knows nothing about. An account funded by the architectural firm I own, the firm she and her family think is just a modest little project management gig. Dr. Sharma picked up the paper, her eyes scanning the columns of dates and figures. Her professional mask slipped for just a second, a flicker of astonishment crossing her features before she regained her composure. Chloe just stared, her mouth slightly agape. Archer, design? What are you talking about? You work for Sterling Cooper. I haven't worked for Sterling Cooper in 5 years, Chloe, Ethan said, his voice flat, devoid of pity. I left to start my own firm. I am the Archer in Archer Design and Development. While you were accusing me of being unambitious, I was building one of the most successful independent architectural firms in the state. He reached into the envelope again. The full revelation was just beginning, and he was going to be methodical. He was going to be thorough. He was going to burn her entire world to the ground with the quiet, devastating power of the truth. The therapist's office had transformed. It was no longer a sanctuary for healing. It was an interrogation room, and Ethan was the one presenting the evidence. Chloe sat frozen, the color draining from her face as the man she thought she knew dissolved before her eyes, replaced by a stranger of immense, hidden competence. Dr. Sharma, for her part, had become a silent observer, her pen still, her gaze shifting from the documents to Ethan's face, then to Chloe's. Ethan reached into the envelope again and pulled out a thick sheaf of papers, held together by a binder clip. He placed it on the table with a soft thud. You mentioned your brother, Leo, he said, his voice still unnervingly calm. You were angry that I refused to give him a small investment for his crypto farm startup. You accused me of trying to control you by proxy. He unclipped the papers and fanned them out. This is a due diligence report compiled by my firm's financial analyst. It details Leo's business history. Exhibit A, he said, tapping a page, is the articles of incorporation for his artisanal crypto farm. It's a shell company registered in Delaware. Exhibit B is the loan agreement for $75,000 from a private lender, a known loan shark that he defaulted on from his previous bespoke dog-walking app venture. I paid that debt for him without your knowledge to keep him from being physically harmed. Exhibit C is the settlement for $42,000 I paid to the investors he defrauded with his vegan leather business. He looked directly at Chloe, his eyes holding hers. I didn't say no to control you. I said no to stop throwing good money after bad, and to stop enabling a con man who happens to be your brother. Chloe shook her head, a gesture of pure denial. No, Leo wouldn't. You're lying. The bank transfers are all here, Ethan said, sliding another set of statements across the table. Dated, timestamps, account numbers. The truth doesn't require your belief, Chloe. It just is. He wasn't finished. He was a builder, and he was deconstructing her reality with the same precision he used to design skyscrapers. Let's talk about your parents, he said, his voice softening into something that sounded almost like sympathy, which made it all the more devastating. Your mother made a comment at the anniversary party about me not being able to afford a decent caterer. He pulled out another file. This folder contains the financial records pertaining to Richard and Eleanor Ashworth. Here are the 3 mortgage refinancing applications I co-signed for them because their credit was shot. Here are the property tax receipts for their home for the last 4 years, all paid from my account. And here, he said, pulling out a single sheet, is the invoice for the catering at their anniversary party. The party your mother implied I couldn't afford. You'll note it was paid in full, 2 weeks in advance by Archer Design and Development. A thank you to my in-laws. He paused, letting the weight of the information settle in the silent room. Chloe was no longer looking at him. She was staring at her hands, which were trembling in her lap. And finally, Ethan said, his voice quiet again, the list of grievances. My supposed crimes against your happiness. He began to methodically dismantle her accusations, using her own words against her, a technique he had learned from years of contract negotiations. You said I was controlling when I questioned a $5,000 charge at Chanel. Here is the statement showing I paid that bill in full 3 days later. It also shows that on the same day, I transferred $15,000 to your father to cover his poker debts, a fact he begged me not to tell you or your mother. You said I was cheap for refusing to take you to Paris for our anniversary. Here is the estimate from the travel agent. For the first-class 5-star trip you actually wanted, totaling over $40,000. And here is the wire confirmation for $45,000 to the IRS, sent the next day, to settle your parents' back taxes and prevent a lien from being placed on their house. You accused me of being secretive. You were right. I was secretive. I was secretive because I knew that if you and your family saw my success, you wouldn't see it as our security. You would see it as a bigger trough to feed from. I hid my success not to control you, but to protect it from you. The last statement landed. Simple, devastating, final. Chloe finally looked up. Her face was a ruin. The carefully constructed mask of indignant victimhood shattered into a million pieces. All that was left was raw, unfiltered horror. The man she had mocked, the man she had belittled and disdained, the man she had accused of keeping her small, had been the sole architect and financier of her entire life. He hadn't been a warden. He had been a king, quietly paying for the upkeep of a court full of jesters who thought he was a fool. Dr. Sharma cleared her throat, her voice hushed. Chloe, she began, is any of this? It's all true, Chloe whispered, the words barely audible. She wasn't speaking to the therapist. She was speaking to the ghost of her marriage. It's all true. The dam hadn't just broken, it had been obliterated. And the flood was just beginning. The session did not so much end as dissolve. Dr. Sharma, looking overwhelmed for the first time since they'd met her, suggested they take a break and schedule individual appointments. Ethan simply stood up, gathered his documents, placed them neatly back into the manila envelope, and walked out of the room without a backward glance. He did not wait for Chloe. The sound of the door clicking shut behind him was the sound of a chapter, and perhaps an entire book of his life ending. Chloe remained in her chair, paralyzed. The silence in the room was immense, a vacuum where her reality used to be. The muted earth tones on the walls now seemed to mock her, the soft lighting harsh and accusatory. She heard Ethan's footsteps fade down the hallway. He was gone. The dam was gone, and she was drowning. Her first instinct was to call for reinforcements, for the people who had always validated her worldview. She fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking so badly she could barely unlock it. She called her mother. It went straight to voicemail. Eleanor Ashworth is unavailable. Please leave a message. Her mother's phone was never unavailable. She called her father. Straight to voicemail. She called Leo. Voicemail. A cold dread, far deeper than the shock she was already feeling, began to creep up her spine. It felt coordinated. It felt final. Meanwhile, in the leather-appointed office of a high-powered attorney downtown, Richard and Eleanor Ashworth were staring at a single-page letter that had arrived by courier 30 minutes earlier. The letterhead read, Archer Design and Development, a name that meant nothing to them. But the contents were terrifyingly clear. It was a formal notice from Ethan's legal counsel. It stated that the various sums of money provided to them over the past 5 years, which they had always considered gifts or familial obligations, were being formally reclassified as personal loans. An itemized list was attached, detailing every bailout, every tax payment, every forgotten bill. The total was a staggering 7-figure number. The letter concluded by stating that a payment plan was being drawn up, but if an agreement was not reached within 30 days, legal proceedings to recover the full amount would commence immediately, using their home as collateral. Richard's face was the color of ash. This is a bluff, he sputtered, though his voice lacked conviction. He can't do this. There were no contracts. There are bank transfers, Richard, Eleanor said, her voice a thin, reedy whisper. She was staring at the line item for her 40th anniversary party catering. $87,000. He paid for the entire thing. The foundation of her superiority, the bedrock of her condescension toward Ethan, had been a lie she'd been living in a house he owned. At the same time, Leo Ashworth was sitting in his leased Maserati, the one he was about to lose, staring at a similar email on his phone. His was less formal. It was from Ethan himself. The subject line was, Your debts. The body of the email was a simple spreadsheet. One column listed every dollar Ethan had given him. The second column listed the date. The third column, titled Repayment Status, was filled with a single word, repeated over and over, pending. At the bottom was a single sentence, I will no longer be financing your failures. I suggest you find a job. The Ashworth family's financial house of cards, built on Ethan's silent generosity and their own arrogant assumptions, was collapsing in real time. They couldn't call Chloe for comfort because they knew instinctively that she was at the epicenter of the blast. They were alone with the consequences of their actions. Back in the now empty therapist's office, Chloe was finally hit by the full force of the tsunami. It wasn't just about the money. It was the crushing realization of her own blindness. She had built an entire identity around her perceived superiority to Ethan. Her sophistication, her family's status, her refined tastes, all of it was a sham, funded by the sensible, unambitious man she had so casually despised. He hadn't just been supporting her, he had been carrying her. He had been carrying her entire family, and she had rewarded him with nothing but contempt. The shame was a physical force, pressing down on her, stealing the air from her lungs. For the first time in her life, Chloe Ashworth was truly alone. There was no one to blame, no one to rescue her. She was faced with a choice stark and terrifying. She could cling to the shattered remnants of her pride, railing against the injustice of it all, and sink into bitterness. Or she could face the horrifying truth of who she had been, and begin the long, arduous process of becoming someone else. For the first time, her life was entirely her own, and she had no idea what to do with it. 3 months later, the city looked different to Ethan. The sunlight seemed sharper, the colors more vibrant. He stood on the balcony of his firm's downtown office, a sleek, minimalist space with panoramic views of the skyline he was helping to shape. He held a warm mug of coffee, watching the morning traffic flow like a metallic river far below. A sense of peace, deep and profound, had settled over him. It was the peace of a man who had finally put down a burden he had carried for too long. His business partner, Marcus Thorne, a shrewd silver-haired man who had been his mentor, came to stand beside him. The city council approved the final schematics for the waterfront project, Marcus said, a grin spreading across his face. Unanimous vote. They called your design visionary. Congratulations, my friend. You've officially hit the big time. We hit the big time, Ethan corrected gently, smiling back. This was a team effort. You're the architect, Ethan. The vision is yours, Marcus insisted. I've never seen you so focused, so light. Whatever was weighing you down these past few years, I'm glad you dealt with it. Ethan nodded, his gaze drifting back to the city. Marcus didn't know the details, only that Ethan had gone through a difficult divorce. He didn't need to know more. The results spoke for themselves. Freed from the constant emotional and financial drain of his marriage, Ethan's creativity and ambition had flourished. His work was bolder, more innovative. He was no longer just building structures. He was building a legacy. The contrast with Chloe's new reality was stark. The sprawling custom home had been sold. Its contents, the designer furniture and expensive art, were liquidated to pay the initial legal fees of the divorce. Chloe now lived in a small, one-bedroom apartment in a less fashionable part of town. The European luxury car was gone, replaced by a bus pass. For the first time in her adult life, she had a job, an entry-level administrative position at a nonprofit. It was humbling, difficult work, and it paid just enough to cover her rent and utilities. Her family was no help. Their own fall had been just as swift. Richard and Eleanor had been forced to sell their home to satisfy a portion of their debt to Ethan, downsizing to a small condo they openly despised. The shock had broken Richard's blustering spirit, leaving him a quiet, bitter man. Leo, cut off from his endless supply of seed money, had been forced to take a job in retail, a daily humiliation he complained about constantly. They blamed Ethan, of course, but they also blamed Chloe for bringing him into their lives and for failing to manage him properly. Their calls to her were no longer filled with gossip and plans, but with recriminations and demands she could no longer meet. One afternoon, Ethan received an email. The sender was Chloe. He almost deleted it without reading, but something made him pause. The subject line was simple. I'm sorry. He opened it. The email was short, devoid of the drama and manipulation that had characterized her for so long. She wrote about her new life, not with self-pity, but with a kind of stunned clarity. She wrote about the shame she felt, not just for what she had done, but for who she had been. It was a genuine, painful, and unconditional apology. It asked for nothing. It made no excuses. The final line read, "You deserve so much better than the person I was. I hope one day I can become someone who is worthy of the kindness you showed me." Ethan read the email twice. He felt a pang, not of love, but of a sad, distant compassion. He saw the first flickering signs of genuine change, of a redemption earned through the crucible of consequence. He thought about the Ashworths, trapped in their bitterness, and Chloe, who was, for the first time, trying to find a way out. The reversal of fortune was complete. Those who had been brought low by their arrogance were staying there, while the one person who was accepting responsibility was beginning the slow, painful climb back toward the light. A week later, Ethan sat in a quiet, unassuming coffee shop, a place he'd chosen for its anonymity. He watched the door, a knot of apprehension tightening in his stomach. He had agreed to meet Chloe, not because he was considering a reconciliation. That bridge had been reduced to ash, but because the woman who wrote that email deserved the courtesy of a face-to-face closure. He needed to understand if the change was real, and perhaps he needed to grant the forgiveness that was the final step in his own liberation. She walked in, and for a moment, he barely recognized her. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by simple, practical attire. Her hair was pulled back simply, and she wore no makeup. The most striking change was in her eyes. The old arrogance, the entitlement, the look of perpetual judgment, it was all gone. In its place was a quiet humility, tinged with a deep, weary sadness. She looked like a soldier returning from a long and brutal war. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, her voice soft as she sat down. She didn't try to touch him, didn't offer a hug or a familiar gesture. The distance between them was a chasm, and she respected it. "Chloe," he acknowledged with a nod. He had rehearsed what he wanted to say, but seeing her now, so diminished and so strangely authentic, the prepared speeches felt hollow. "I don't want anything," she said quickly, as if sensing his caution. "I don't want money. I don't want you back. I needed to say it to your face. I am sorry. For everything. For the things I said, the things I took, and most of all, for the person I was. I was a shallow, cruel, and profoundly ignorant woman." He listened, studying her face. There were no tricks, no hidden angles. It was just the truth, raw and unvarnished. "I have to ask," he said, his voice gentle. "Why? Why did you let it go on for so long? The contempt, the mockery from your family. Why did you treat me that way?" She looked down at her hands, wrapped around a cup of tea she hadn't touched. "Because I was a coward," she whispered. "My whole life, my parents taught me that our value was in our status, our name, our possessions. You were different. You had a quiet strength, a core of integrity that they couldn't understand, so they dismissed it. And I was so desperate for their approval, so terrified of being cast out, that I went along with it. I adopted their view of you because it was easier than standing up to them and defending the good man I had married." She finally looked at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "It was worse than just going along. I think, deep down, I was jealous of you. You didn't need any of it. You were whole on your own. I wasn't, so I tried to make you small, so I wouldn't feel so small myself." It was the most honest thing she had ever said to him. In her confession, he found the final piece of the puzzle. It wasn't just about money or status. It was about a profound insecurity she had masked with arrogance. He had been trying to fill a hole that had nothing to do with finances. "I did love you, Chloe," he said, and it was true. He was speaking of the man he used to be, and the woman he had hoped she was. "That's why I did it. I thought I was protecting you from the stress of it all. I thought if I just handled everything, you could be happy. But my protection became a prison for both of us. It enabled your worst instincts, and it turned me into a silent, resentful liar." "You were never the liar, Ethan," she said, a sad smile touching her lips. I was lying to everyone, most of all to myself." They sat in silence for a few minutes, the unspoken history of their marriage hanging between them. It was a sad story, but it was no longer a painful one. The wounds had become scars, and the scars were beginning to fade. He stood up to leave. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Chloe," he said, and he meant it. "I hope you build a life that is truly your own." "I'm trying," she said, "one day at a time." He walked out of the coffee shop and into the bright afternoon sun, feeling lighter than he had in years. He had not taken her back, but he had offered her grace. He had not forgotten the past, but he had forgiven it. The moral of their story was painfully clear. True worth is built from character, not bought with credit. Respect must be earned through action, not demanded by birthright. And sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is to let go of a life they thought they wanted, to make room for the one that is waiting for them. Ethan looked up at the towering buildings of the city, at the endless blue sky beyond, and for the first time in a very long time, he felt like he could build anything. His future was a clean blueprint, and he was the sole architect. What do you think is the most important lesson from Ethan and Chloe's story? Is it about the danger of materialism, the importance of communication, or the quiet strength of integrity? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you found value in this story, please show your support by liking and subscribing. We have many more stories to tell, and we'd love for you to be a part of our community. Until next time, remember to value the things that can't be bought.